Happy Sukkot. It is also referred to as the Feast of Tabernacles, and it's in memory of God's miraculous hand bringing the Israelites out of slavery from Egypt under Pharaoh through the desert 40 years to the Promised Land. And so the makeshift shelters are set up usually in backyards or on balconies, and flora fauna are used and sometimes fall motif. And it's where friends and family can gather and celebrate, eating outside, and sometimes children and even adults will sleep under these makeshift shelters. So it's a joyous celebration. Which brings me to my drawing / painting of Moshe, and this comes from the amazing sculpture of Michelangelo from 1513 to 1515. You'll see some slight differences. He has one tablet here. I chose to put two, and rounded versus his hard edge. And then there's another difference. If you don't know, I'll give you a hint. The horns on top of Moshe's head. Unfortunately, that comes from a mistranslation by St Jerome, who did the Vulgate, the Latin translation. And instead of going by the Hebrew Bible, which Karen is the word that has two meanings. One is horn, which means strength, and it's singular, or rays of light. So St. Jerome chose to use the translation of horns with the S, and of course that creates this very demonic, devil-like appearance. And it's interesting, but Freud in 1913 came to Rome to study Michelangelo's sculpture and talked about one thing, the twirling of the hair that Michelangelo did. You can see that also here with his fingers in his long beard. He was obsessing about that, what that might meant. And the other thing he brought to light was these horns and how they did have this demonic impact on the visitor seeing these. So this a sculpture of Moses was commissioned by Pope Julius II, and he and Michelangelo had a lot of conflict. So the interesting thing is, though, that even though this was a sculpture for his tomb, on Saturdays, the art historian Vasari wrote that the Jews in Rome during this time period would come and look at this sculpture, and they basically adopted it as their own because they just loved the fact that Moses had been represented by Michelangelo. And of course, it's exquisite when we look at the anatomy of the figure, when we look at the beard and the delicacy of the hair, how he was able to chisel that. It's just amazing. It's a stupendous piece of sculpture. Now, what is interesting is that, of course, I removed the horns and did the rays of light here. This goes back to Exodus 32 through 35. And if you're not familiar with that, it's a good thing to read because it's a great story about the experiences as they're going through the desert, but God's provision of these 10 commandments. And of course, we hear someone like Candace Owens wrongly taking Judeo out of Judeo-Christian values, because when she does that, she's basically taking the 10 commandments out of that, which Judeo means Jew, and God, with Moses, the Jew, the Israelite, created these 10 commandments. That was God's finger writing the 10 commandments on these two tablets. Now we know the first time that Moses went up to the mount and God wrote the 10 commandments, God heard all of this singing and revelry going down below, and he was angry about it. And so when Moses went down with the 10 commandments the first time, he saw the golden calf and he realized why God was so angry. They the Israelites had gotten anxious, impatient, started to take matters into their own hands, asked Aaron to melt down their earrings, create this idol. Now, of course, they came out of Egypt, which had many idols and animal idols that they worshipped. So it was from that they then created this golden calf, which was, of course, very evil in God's eyes, because God is the one that had delivered them from the Egyptians, and he was the one that was sustaining them through the desert, giving them land that they were getting to through these 40 years to the promised land. So this was such a slap in God's face, and of course made Moshe extremely angry. He threw the tablets down, they broke, and then of course he had to do something that a lot of people don't hear about when this story is told, but Moses had to separate the people who wanted to continue worshiping the golden calf from those that would come back and be with him and follow the Lord. When he did that, now the Bible says there was 600,000 Israelite men who came out of slavery with Moses, not counting the women and children. So we would assume then that some people rate it as 2 million people, Israelites, in the desert with Moses. Out of those 2 million, 3,000 wanted to stay and worship the golden calf. So a lot of people don't know this, but Moses then, because God was so angry, had those 3,000 killed. Yes, 3,000 Israelites were killed because they wanted to keep worshiping this fake, false God, this God that Aaron had made that was against the living God. So Moses melted this golden calf down and then took those ashes and from this burned calf, sprinkled them on the water, and all of the Israelites were to drink this. Fascinating story. It's very interesting. And then, of course, the 3,000 were killed, and also God didn't just stop there, because even though those withdrew from worshiping the golden calf, they still had worshiped it. And so even though they weren't killed, God sent a plague on them. That's how serious this was to God, and why God wanted always the Jewish people to be drawn away from false gods, to be worshiping the real miraculous God. These false gods couldn't do miracles, yet God can. Yet Israelites and people of all types keep wanting to worship either no God, as atheists do, or false gods, and those aren't the true God. So Moses goes a second time up to Mount Sinai, and that time God again writes the 10 Commandments with his own finger on these tablets that Moses has chiseled. When he comes down the second time, he is glowing. He has been in the presence of the Shekinah glory. So he has this glow about him, this radiance of light. And that, unfortunately, is not what St Jerome wrote. And that's why we instead have this portrayal of Moses with the horns on his head. Now, what's interesting about this is that we go from the golden calf to then now Moses calls out the artists and artisans from the Israelites, and he wants them to create the traveling tabernacle and the items that will be within that tabernacle. And one of those items is the Ark of the Covenant. And this is what's so fascinating. If you do not know what's in the ark, it's not just the ark, but it's also what's kept in it. The 10 Commandments are kept in it, which is a reference to not only the Judeo-Christian values, but also the finger of God literally wrote those 10 Commandments on those tablets. Also, the rod of Aaron, which of course we know that Aaron threw down in front of Pharaoh. It became a snake, and then he picked it up and it became a rod. That's also in the ark. And then the manna. Every morning, fresh manna from heaven would be falling down onto the ground for the Israelites to wake up to get this fresh sustenance for them. Another miracle of God. And so when the Ark of the Covenant is revealed, when it is brought to light, because I believe it is in existence, some say that those who know where it is. Others say it is yet to be found. Whether they know and they just can't access it yet, I'm not sure. But I know that when it is found, inside of it will be the 10 Commandments with God's finger written on them, chiseled by Moses, but the actual commands written by the finger of God, miraculously. The rod of Aaron, the budding rod of Aaron, and that manna. I have read that they have found centuries-old raisins that they still have when they have unearthed these. And so I am convinced that the manna will still be manifested in the Ark of the Covenant. When they find this Ark, they will have to build the third temple. And that will be another of the prophecies of the Hebrew Bible that will become realized in our time. Just like the state of Israel was a prophecy that has come true. Also, the Aliyah of the Jews from all over the globe back to Israel, another prophecy that is happening in our time from the ancient text. So things are ramping up. It is exciting, and I just love the fact that everyone now is looking at itsy bitsy tiny Israel. It's only 290 miles compared to the 5 million miles of the 22 states of Arab states around it. Yet people are looking to Israel. It's as if this full circle is coming back to Israel. And another great story I wanted to share with you about Michelangelo is, this is great. So this is the sculpture, I don't know if you can see it, sorry, of a Trojan father and his sons. It is a Hellenistic sculpture, and it is something that Pliny the Elder wrote about. He wrote about this sculpture. It's 6 feet tall. And Michelangelo knew an architect of Pope Julius II. And there were laborers in a vineyard during Michelangelo's time who were digging and who hit marble, and they hit this sculpture. Now, the vineyard owner let Pope Julius II know, because Julius loved artwork. And of course, we know that. He was hiring Michelangelo. And so he sent his architect to go see this sculpture being unearthed. This architect called upon Michelangelo to be with him with the unearthing of this amazing sculpture. It is also called the Laocoön sculpture. So ArtNet News just a few days ago released this article about Lynn Catterson, who is an art historian. She used to be in the sciences. Then she got her PhD in art history. She is claiming that Michelangelo, at this time, when this unearthing of this Hellenistic fabulous piece of sculpture happened, that this was in 1506. Lynn Catterson has found a sketch of Michelangelo's that is the back of this Trojan father's back. And of course, you can see them being attacked by the serpents, because Poseidon sent serpents to attack he and his sons for their wrongdoing. In 1501, Michelangelo had a sketch of the back of this sculpture. He also had ordered volumes of marble, which he had receipts for that she found. Now, he had the commission for the Pietà, but nothing else. And he also wrote at this time to his father that he had the pleasure of working on personal sculptures. The other thing that Michelangelo had was a private studio. Often artists would work together. He had his own studio. So her claim is that this is not from the Hellenistic period of 2040 BC that is in the Vatican Museum. It actually is from the mind and the handiwork of Michelangelo himself. It is a stupendous counterfeit. Yes, this is her claim. For any of you who are interested in art history and this piece, keep your eyes and ears open to what might be unveiled about this as we go forward. She has a lot of evidence that I find is pretty solid. Now, of course, the powers that be may not like this story, but we have to go back to the mind of Michelangelo. He was headbutting against the Catholic Church quite a bit. In fact, his painting, The Last Judgment, you will find him doing odd things to the leaders of the church that he's depicting in that painting that aren't exactly uplifting. They're actually, putting them down. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, you could go look that up. But he really was not in favor of the Catholic Church and the power that they were wielding. Also, the opulence that they were living in. He didn't like that either. And so it wouldn't be a big stretch for me to think that he concocted this with the Pope's architect and this vineyard owner, that they would, Michelangelo would create this sculpture, have it buried, and then have these laborers find it, and then that this Pope would purchase it from this landowner. And I am sure that then it was split between the landowner, Michelangelo, and the architect, the money that the Pope gave to this landowner. And I find that it is a very fascinating story, clever, and goes to the humor, and also just Michelangelo very creatively getting money from the church, but also having this perpetuating lie and counterfeit forgery in the Vatican for all of these years. My hat's off to Lynn Catterson for this find. And again, happy Sukkot. May the hostages all be delivered as the Israelites were from their captors. And we look forward to that. God bless you. God loves you.